'Tis the season to be stress-free. Our health discussion on blackdoctor.org, your daily medicine for life. I'm your health moderator for today, Nurse Alice Benjamin, and we'll be talking about how to manage stress. Now, whether it's holiday stress or stress from work, family, or any of the many social issues our nation is currently undergoing, if you're like most Americans, you've experienced some kind of stress. So today, we're joined by a wonderful panel of experts who will be answering your questions and leaving us with pearls of wisdoms on how to live stress-free. So I'd like to begin by introducing our panel. First, we have Miss Asha Tari. She is a licensed and trained mental health professional with 14 years of experience in providing mental health services to children, adolescents, adults, and senior citizens. Her work includes years of case management with the chronically mentally ill, psychotherapy, community organizing, and social activism. She holds a master's degree in social work from Fordham University and a bachelor's in human services from Pace University, and postgraduate training in psychoanalytic psychotherapy from the Object Relations Institute. She's also the sole proprietor of Behavioral Health Consulting Services. So we'd like to welcome Asha. And also joining us, we have Dr. Isaiah Pickens. He is a clinical psychologist who specializes in consulting, counseling, and educational services for families, teens, and young adults. He's also currently faculty at New York University School of Medicine and Bellevue Hospital Center in the Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. He has research that focuses on young people understanding themselves and the world around them. In addition to Dr. Pickens' academic work, he founded a creative writing company called Eye-Opening Enterprises, which specializes in creating books, films, life skill workshops for teens and young adults. And his first project from Eye-Opening Enterprises was his debut book entitled The Dawn of Generation Y. And last but definitely not least, we have Dr. James Wadley. He's an associate professor and director of the Master of Human Services program at the Lincoln University. He's also a licensed professional counselor and maintains a private practice in the states of both Pennsylvania and New Jersey. He's also the founding editor of the scholarly interdisciplinary journal, the Journal of Black Sexuality and Relationships. His academic and professional background in human sexuality education and educational leadership has enabled him to galvanize scholars and practitioners in the field of sexology across the world. And the resume goes on and on and on, and we could spend the whole conversation talking about all of their accomplishments, but I think many of us would like to jump into the nitty-gritty of things and talk about stress. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into our first question here. I'll say introduction, and I'll start with you, Asha. If you can tell us, as African Americans, mental health can be a very taboo topic, and stress actually falls under the realm of mental health. Can you tell us, how do we begin this conversation about stress? What is it, what it does to us, and then how can we live more stress-free?
I think foremost, recognizing how stress takes a toll on us physically is a beginning point to start that conversation. I think oftentimes we don't understand the ramifications of overload and not setting up boundaries for ourselves, especially as professionals, but also as professionals who have and wear many different hats. So I think having a conversation with our providers and our loved ones and making it a normal part of our everyday talk about what stress is, what it looks like, how it feels, and how we physically manifest stress in different ways, from having physical symptoms of stress, whether there are aches in your neck or your shoulders, there's tension, whether you're not sleeping well at night, how we can actually maintain a healthier balance can come into play with that conversation beginning foremost either in our practitioner's office, at the doctor's office, or with our loved ones and friends.
Okay, great. Now, Dr. Pickens, if you could piggyback on that, how have you started the conversation around, mental health topics such as stress with some of your clients or people that you personally know?
I think one of the amazing things when you talked, Asha, earlier about stress being a physical aspect is that physical things are easier to talk about than mental health problems at times. And so sometimes people don't necessarily connect the things that are happening in their body with the stress that's happening around them. For instance, they may have aches or pains. They may have different headaches at times. They may even feel so drained that they don't want to get to work. And you say, what's going on in your life? And they might say, well, it's just I'm going through life like everyone else. But in actuality, they're experiencing an excessive amount of stress that's really draining them, not just physically, but also mentally. And when you don't have the mental capacity to really start to deal with some of these physical problems, it can really get to you. And so usually the way I start is with simple things. How can we better organize your life? Because sometimes people really take on too much, or they don't take on the right types of things, or they keep the wrong kinds of people in their lives, and that is the stress that's draining them. So if you can organize that a little bit better, it becomes a little bit more manageable, and it's a conversation that's easier to have.
Right.
Okay, you raised some good points there about organizing some of the stress in your life and identifying some of the physical components of it, which may be your first indications that you might be under stress. Now, Dr. Wadley, I'm just going to spin this a little bit towards you and ask you, do you find many people are able to identify that they're under stress?
Yeah.
Because I think,
Oh,
go ahead.
No, I just wanted to jump in. The sentiments of what the other two panelists shared, they're well taken in that, there are physiological symptoms that emerge with stress, as well as, mental health issues. But one of the things that I like to talk about with regards to stress is not only those two components, but, what are the behaviors that evidence themselves when people are stressed out? So a lot of times when people are stressed out, they may tend to isolate themselves or withdraw from their friends or their family, and they may be more or less talkative about the issues that concern them, as well as they have difficulty managing their moodiness and their anxiety. And those feelings as well as behaviors actually drive, the drive the physiological responses that people have difficulty managing those behaviors.
Okay. Now, you raised some very good points now. Asha, I'm going to bring it back to you. Now, I'm under stress. I think everyone's experienced some form of stress. Now, how do I know if this is really just holiday stress and it too shall pass, or if this is stress that's, in my life all the time that I definitely need to manage? How can I identify that? Or how would I know?
I think foremost, having a conversation about some of the physical things that we discussed earlier would be a good place to go, but also I think what I do with my clients sometimes is I have them write down what it is they spend their day doing and where they find their most pleasure. So oftentimes, especially with women, we're wearing so many different hats as caretakers, as head of household sometimes, we're professionals, we're in school, and what we tend to find is that we think those normal physiological changes that we're experiencing every day are regular normative behaviors that we're supposed to have or that are just part of our everyday life, so we don't oftentimes see if there's a change, if those physical symptoms are increasing, or if we're noticing a change in the way we're feeling not only mentally, sometimes spiritually, also in how we're relating to other people. So I think what we have to do is really have people find concrete ways, writing down what they do from day to day, where they're getting their most activity, where they're finding that they're physically more exhausted, maybe where they're a little bit more wired to feel a little bit more anxious at times. I find that with my clients, if I put them in a place where they can actually write down what it is that they're spending their day doing and where they're actually spending their free time and how they're spending their free time and seeing where the changes are, not only mentally but spiritually and physically, they can see a difference. But often we don't find that people make the time for that. They're just moving from one activity to the next and one situation and environment to the next.
Okay. So that's very helpful in identifying and sharing how you identify stress in your clients. But now let me ask you, Dr. Pickens, Asha, she talked about some telltale points there, but is there such a thing as holiday blues or holiday stress that can actually compound maybe some existing stress that I already have in my life?
Well, first you have to check your pockets, right? That always gives a lot of people blues around the holiday time. But in terms of holiday time, it can sometimes be a little bit more stressful because same things that give us joy, the same things that give us the opportunity to feel like we're connecting with others are sometimes a reminder for some people of what they don't have. And they acknowledge that, maybe not verbally, or they might not fully be able to articulate it, but that sense of either loss or an anniversary of remembering someone who was there who isn't there anymore can definitely have an effect on people's mood, and just the increased responsibility sometimes for people who are caring for people during this time can increase it. But that's definitely different than what we consider clinical depression. Clinical depression is a pattern of sadness that happens feeling down for more than 2 weeks, and we see changes in appetite. We see difficulty in focusing or concentration. Sometimes people have thoughts of ending their lives, as well as we can see difficulty in having a lot of energy or having being irritated. And this shows up differently in kids as well. And so it's important to keep all these aspects in mind. One of the key things with mental health that we always look for is what's the change in baseline. And what we mean by that is, how is the person normally, and how have they changed now, and how does that interfere with their life? And so those are some key indicators that you want to look at. And usually it's the closest family members who are most aware because they're close to these people.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So let me bring this back. Asha, she talked about identifying, maybe some of our day-to-day stress. You just mentioned some things that might contribute, especially around the holidays. Now, there's something else that I want to talk about. I mean, there's been a lot of issues in the news with some of the police violence and things like that. Now, I want to ask Dr. Wadley, can that also serve as a third layer to stress around this time of the year for people? And because I some of the things I see in the news, they do stress me, but I don't know. I sometimes don't know to what degree do those impact me.
Right. With regards to, the recent national events, the challenge with the holiday season and combining that with the recent events is that people bring a lot of different values to the holiday season. And in the event that there is a loss or a national loss, as you mentioned, Nurse Alice, it's compounded. And when you have family members sitting around at the Thanksgiving table, the Christmas holiday table, or the Hanukkah table, or whatever, you have all these different value systems that filter into the conversations that families have around the events that happen. And all of us have our different perspectives. And what happens is that when people have these conversations at the table, they find themselves either agreeing or disagreeing about what's happened, and that in and of itself causes stress. Whereas your parents may think that you should follow their value system around, the shootings and all the protesting and things like that, but you've grown up with your own ideas about what should or should not have happened with regards to the violence or with the protest. And so again, a lot of times families have a difficult time talking about those sensitive issues, because that's what they are, and they have difficulty accepting that their family members, or the folks that they've married, or the folks that they've grown up with, that they have a totally different value system around the events.
Yeah, wow. Thank you for that answer. And for those of you just tuning in, tis the season to be stress-free. This is our health discussion on blackdoctor.org, your daily medicine for life. I'm your health moderator, Nurse Alice, and we have a wonderful panel of experts who are helping us to understand how to live stress-free, how to identify it, and will tell us some of the things that we need to do to manage it. Now, before we move on in the conversation, I want to talk about we're talking about stress. That's one component of mental health. There's so much more to it, but especially around this times, and I don't know if it's just me or if it's coincidental, and Asha, if you can go ahead and take this one. We recently just heard of the news about the co-founder of Miss Jessie's hair products, TT Branch, committed suicide. And I'll be honest, strolling through my own Facebook, I've seen some other news of other people committing suicide. Is this all a part of stress, or is it just heightened awareness around the holidays?
I think we tend to see these stories throughout the year, when we get closer to the holiday season and people are experiencing different levels of angst around financial stressors, around changes with employment, around how they are reminded of special occasions, special loved ones who are no longer here, we tend to think that certain things are going on at an exclusive period of time when actually it's been going on throughout the year. In the case with T.T. Branch, I know it hasn't yet been confirmed as to the cause of death, but it is suspected that she did take her own life. With a holiday season, with the loss of sunlight during this time of year, people are more prone to find themselves being depressed, finding themselves experiencing symptoms of seasonal affective disorder, finding themselves to possibly be thinking of suicidal thoughts. But those things aren't just exclusive to this particular time of the year. Those things are actually going on throughout the year, and there are 30,000 plus people a year who are actually dying as a result of suicide. Unfortunately, when we know of people like T.T. Branch and we see people in the news that we connect to, we take the story a little bit more personally, and we tend to think that it's only going on at this exclusive time of the year. In her case, and until the reports are actually confirmed, there's just speculation that she did die by suicide. It's not unusual that this time of year would bring about people to feel more depressed. Others may think that it's a joyous time of year, and it is, but a lot of people are actually under more stress than usual because of the constraints that they have on spending, saving. People tend to get laid off at this time of year, and then there's an expectation of we still have to meet our families and our friends' needs to buy gifts and be celebratory and show up at events, and that takes time and money and energy that a lot of people just don't always have. So it's an unfortunate occasion to hear of this at this particular time. It's saddened to have someone in her position who so many people revere end her life possibly in this way. But it's not particularly surprising that we're hearing of this, and we may hear more stories like this as the year continues on and people experience changes in their lives.
Yes, thank you for that. You know, it's very tragic to hear stories like that. And I know we initially set off the discussion to talk about stress, but I think it's an excellent gateway to discussing other issues around mental health. You know, there are other things, you know, bipolar, but, you know, I heard you mention depression, and, you know, along with, you know, this time of year, and maybe it's just me, but I seem to have a heightened awareness of suicides or people feeling like, you know, there's nothing to live for. Dr. Pickens, can you talk to us a little bit more about maybe how stress or depression contributes to suicide, and if, you know, what are some signs that I might be able to identify in someone who might be considering that?
Yeah, so suicide is a life and death issue. So it's one of those issues that hits home especially when we have people close to us in our community. And some things that are really, really big risk factors are people who have experienced a recent loss, and a loss isn't just financial. It can be, or a death in the family. It can mean a loss of being within a community, of a relationship, such as a divorce. That's a huge risk factor. Another really big risk factor is hopelessness. Once people feel like, okay, there's not much to live for anymore, it becomes much more of an option. And particularly when you see people who are impulsive or use substances, this all makes that option that they think suicide being an option to deal with their problems, something that not only do they consider, but if they're impulsive, they might act on in the moment. And one thing I think is so important to dispel is if you ask someone if they're thinking about ending their life or dying by suicide, you are not putting the idea in their head. In fact, you're opening a door for them to talk. I like to liken this to CPR. Who are you most likely to use CPR on? It's your family members, because those are the people who are closest to you. That's the person who's most likely to have, you know, a cardiac arrest when you're around. Well, the people who are closest to you who might be experiencing this, and for you to notice that they're changing and they might be considering dying by suicide, are the people in your family or who are closest to you. So when you ask them, you open up a door for them to feel comfortable to talk about it with someone and show that you can handle it, and hopefully help them get closer to someone who can help.
Thank you for that. And I you know, definitely want to make sure that I mention this. You know, there is a National Suicide Prevention Lifeline that people can call. whether it's for you or someone you feel needs this information, it's very important that we share. And that number is 1-800-273-TALK. That's the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And we'll mention that again through this Google chat. But again, suicide, as you said, doctor, is a life or death matter, and we definitely need to talk about it. And so thank you for making me feel better about the fact, because I kind of felt that if I mention it, I am planting a seed. So it's reassuring to hear you say that no, that's not the case, that we do need to have this discussion and talk about these things. And then also in your comment, and then I'll segue to you, Dr. Wadley, he mentioned suicide along with some impulsive behavior or substance abuse. Do you find in your practice that people who are stressed, depressed, or contemplating suicide, do you find that substance abuse and alcoholism is something that goes hand in hand with it? It seems to be a myth.
No, they do go hand in hand.
Okay.
Not only substance abuse, but alcoholism. I do see a range of clients who not only struggle with those two substances, but also struggle with compulsive internet usage. So sometimes when people want to check out of their families or with their friends, they'll spend inordinate amounts of time on the internet, or they'll spend inordinate amounts of time playing Xbox or PlayStation or shopping or gambling or compulsive eating. And oftentimes people will use those behaviors to act out and to not be in touch with their feelings or not be in touch with what's going on with their friends or their family. And because they're not in touch, it does increase the likelihood that one may experience suicidal ideation. And so again, it doesn't necessarily have to be drugs or alcohol. It could be, like I said, compulsive gambling, compulsive eating, compulsive internet usage, downloading pornography, or the like. And they do go hand in hand.
Okay.
If I could just add to that, I think when we talk about putting the idea into someone's mind, we have to understand that people who are depressed tend to think about suicide twice as often as someone who's not depressed. But thinking of suicide is not an indicator that someone is actually going to commit suicide. We have to actually keep that in the forefront of the conversation as well, because when we have the conversation with people who are having the suicidal ideations, we think that it's an urgent matter to respond to, and that if we don't seek out help for them, or they don't seek out help for themselves, then they're imminent in terms of dying by suicide. We want to take suicidal conversations very seriously. We want people to understand that if someone is talking about self-harm, then we do need to have an imminent response to that. But suicidal thinking happens more often than you think. People tend to think of suicide and attempt suicide 25 times before they even actually die as a result of suicide. But having the conversation and having those thoughts that you're hopeless and no one's there to help you and you're all alone are conversations that most people do want to have, and being able to be there in the moment with the person while they're experiencing that deep despair is an important conversation for us to have with those people.
Okay, thank you for mentioning that. Again, I think many people are afraid to have these conversations because they're not sure what to say or what to do or how to be there for the person. But it sounds like if someone has expressed some type of ideation around suicide, that we take it very seriously and that we make sure that we get them the help that they need. We don't want to waste any time and take that conversation very seriously. So thank you, Asha. So, and then also thank you, Dr. Wadley. You mentioned, I know my question was about the alcoholism and the substance abuse, and but you brought up compulsive behaviors. I have to be honest, I don't think that I would have thought of that as something else to look out for.
Right.
So people are always on the internet. It's the holidays. There's going to be some, recreational drinking. Hopefully there is no recreational substance abuse, but hey, it's not to say it doesn't exist.
Right.
But how do we know when it's too much? How do we know when it's excessive into a point where, you know what, I really should be, take a second look at, what Uncle Jimmy's doing? Like, how do I know when it's too much? Dr. Pickens, maybe can you take that question?
Yeah. I think one of the main things that we look at is it getting in the way of your everyday life? And so functioning is a big part of what we look at in the mental health field. So is it Are you doing it to the point where it's getting in the way of you going to work? Are you doing it to the point where it's getting in the way of you being able to take care of your kids or take care of other people in your life? And then on
Hmm.
top of that, have you had plans to not have as many and you always have gone over it? And so when
Hmm.
people actually aren't able to control a lot of those impulses to have more, that's a huge problem. And then part of what you have to understand is what's the reason behind you drinking. And
Hmm.
so some people they have social anxiety and they feel that in this setting this is what makes them cool, and so it becomes a part of their identity in a way in this different type of setting versus other people who come home and they've had a long day and they don't know how to have conversations with their spouse and they drink.
Hmm.
And so a lot of those driving forces can tell you, okay, this is a bigger problem than just going out to have one or two drinks. And so those are some of the main things you would want to look out for.
And
Right.
Okay.
if I could just chime in a little bit with that too. So there's the question of what's dependence, I think you're saying, and what's abuse. When is it too much and when is it just enough? So the holiday seasons, people are going to be more festive. They're going to attend holiday parties at work, socially with friends and family. So alcohol tends to be present in all of those situations. But when you find that people are using not only their spare time, but time that they would be spending either in work or school to seek the substance, then you know that it's become something that is not only psychologically depending on that substance for the next high, the next level of pleasure, but also physiological changes that are going on with you to seek that same type of substance in order to get that next hit, that next high. So we
Hmm.
have to think about the mental and the physical addiction to the substance that we're seeking out and how frequent it is that we're seeking that out and in what areas of our lives is it interfering with us being able to go to work, go to school, parent our children, and be helpful citizens in society.
Right. And if I may chime in as well, in addition to what the other two panelists shared, I have clients who come in who engage in compulsive shopping, and the holidays are an excuse to go out and spend hundreds and thousands of dollars to buy one's happiness during the holidays, but when the presents are presented, they still haven't dealt with their core issues of the dysfunction and the toxicity in the family. And people find that the holidays become a trigger, whether it's Christmas or New Year's or Valentine's Day or Mother's Day or Father's Day and so on, and that people have an opportunity to literally check out of their family system, spend significant amounts of time at the mall or at the store or online shopping, and feeling as if they can reconnect with their families with the gifts that they buy. And there's no difference between alcoholism, substance abuse, compulsive shopping, compulsive internet usage, and compulsive gambling. The bottom line is that all of those behaviors are a deflection of intimacy between the individual and one's family member and between the individual and him or herself.
Wow, this is, I mean, if you're just tuning in, this is "'Tis the Season to Be Stress-Free." This is your health discussion on blackdoctor.org, your daily medicine for life. Again, I'm Nurse Alice. I'm moderating this fabulous conversation, a panel of experts who are talking to us about stress, depression, substance abuse, suicide, a wealth of information around mental health. And also, if you've just tuned in, please join us on our Twitter chat. Please follow blackdoctor.org on Twitter, and much of the information we're talking about now, we're also tweeting it. Please join us for our Twitter chat and engage in the conversation, because this is definitely something that we need to be talking more about. Now, Dr. Pickens, I'm going to bring it back to you real quickly. Stress, depression, we've talked about substance abuse, compulsive behaviors around the holiday times. Is there a connection, or if you can explain to us if there is a connection between those behaviors and domestic violence? Is there any relation between the two? Because, when you're kind of scanning the television, you're seeing, you see a lot of things around these topics, but there always seems to be some form of violence in
Mhm.
there. Is there a connection?
Yeah, so I would have to say that a connection in terms of trying to really figure out a way to control the individual is at the heart of what we talk about when we talk about domestic violence. And so, even though it might be more salient on the news and other outlets, I would say that this provides the holiday time provides an opportunity for someone to use different mechanisms to try to control someone, but not necessarily that there's a higher prevalence of this behavior during this particular time. And so when you talk about domestic violence, part of the issue that you really want to look at is how is the person using guilt, shame, other types of emotional mechanisms to try to really shame the person and control the person who they are abusing in some way. And so even though the holiday time may potentially provide opportunities for someone to be around their family more, to be able to guilt them into different types of situations, I don't think that this should distract from the fact that these likely are patterns of behavior that happen throughout the year and that people should be aware of at all times. And so being aware of when someone is in a situation that they feel very uncomfortable with, they feel unsafe both emotionally, physically, and psychologically, the holiday time may highlight that, but it's a pattern that likely happens throughout the year.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you for bringing that up. Now, Asha, he mentioned some, guilting people, shaming people, blaming people. People that do these type of things, could that be maybe a sign or symptom that someone themselves is going through depression or stress, and it's manifesting as domestic, in domestic violence?
I would say in most cases where people are the aggressor, there is an underlying psychological issue. Whether it goes undiagnosed, that's another question. You're not going to often see abusers sitting in a practitioner's chair seeking psychotherapy unless he or she is willing to reform themselves and admit that there's patterns of behavior that have been destructive and that they own up to it and they take accountability for those measures. But when you're talking about the aggressor in a domestic violence situation, you may find there are signs and not necessarily symptoms of an illness per se, but you may find that there are issues with social engagement with other people, self-esteem, some issues possibly with depression as well. But how do we get people to the point where they're going to take responsibility and accountability for their behaviors is another question. We don't want to look at how the victim is a part of the situation in any type of blame which the aggressor has already put out there, but we definitely want to consider that the aggressor has their own psychological needs that are being unmet, and either it's not been brought up early on in their lives, and so violence is a way for them to act out either what's not being said or communicated verbally, and if they feel that they're a threat or someone is a threat to their self-concept and who they are and how they see themselves, then most likely they're going to become more aggressive as time goes on.
Mm-hmm.
Now, domestic violence is definitely a serious issue. It's been a lot in the news also recently with Ray Rice and some other things that are going on. Dr. Wadley, can you help our viewers identify maybe some physical or psychosocial or behavior patterns in which might help us identify that someone we know or maybe even ourselves are in an abusive relationship, so we can, identify it and do something about it?
Yes, what I share with my clients and family and students is that, domestic violence, or excuse me, intimate partner violence is about power and how power manifests itself in any relationship, meaning that we choose to give our power to others and we choose to take power from others in all of our relationships. Some people are more proficient at managing that power better than others. And so when building a relationship or even maintaining a relationship, if you are in a relationship with someone who refuses to talk about his or her issues that are sensitive, then that may be a sign. And that if one isn't willing to talk about what's personable or what may be part of their family history or part of their relationship history, that's a sign. And there's no reason for anyone to not be willing to share what's really going on with them. But in many of our relationships, we make excuses for not talking with our partners by saying, oh, he or she wasn't ready, I just need to give them time. Well, when time elapses and we give people, the latitude to obviously to pass, sometimes when people hold those things in, it builds up over time, and they may respond to us in a way that's not in alignment with what we want in our relationship. So here it is, if I have a candid conversation with my partner about life, love, and happiness and what allows James Wadley to be James Wadley, and my partner is unwilling to share or only shares briefly, then somewhere down the road there exists a possibility that my partner may say to me, or may not say to me, what's really going on, and it creates a lot of stress, which goes back to what we were talking about. So then in that circumstance, I can either enable my partner to talk to me, or I can create a barrier for that to happen. So as I negotiate power with my partner has a better sense of who I am as a person and whether or not he or she can take advantage of me. And it's unfortunate that, some couples don't create the space to engage in candid dialogue, not only about my relationship history, but whether or not I have a positive or negative relationship with my family members, whether or not I would have a positive or negative relationship with my previous partners, because it's a sensitive issue. And I think one of the things that we as practitioners can do is, again, encourage our individuals, couples, and families to talk about what they're thinking, how they're feeling, and what they used to do, as well as what they currently do and what they plan on doing. But again, a lot of times people are unwilling to have that sensitive dialogue.
And
One
that's
thing,
definitely
if I could just add one thing to it, I think those are some great points everyone's making. One of the things about mental illness and abuse and all these things is we're talking about distorted thinking. And with an abuser, many times one of the distortions they have is they see threat everywhere, and they see themselves or they portray themselves as the savior from that threat, even though they may be a threat themselves. And that the back and forth in terms of inconsistent love shown in a very, even if it's in an aggressive way, is just enough to have someone believe that this person may be that savior from the threat of, you shouldn't go and hang out with those friends because they're no good for you, or your family, they're not going to let you be who you really need to be. I'm the one who can do that for you. And so when you see things like that are happening too often, and that people feel guilty to stay in that relationship or feel drawn to this person for that reason, that could be a huge red flag that there may be abuse emotionally, physically, or psychologically in that relationship.
Thank you for bringing it up. Again, domestic violence, or as it was referenced earlier, intimate partner violence, is something that's very serious. If for our viewers out there, if you or anyone is afraid or feel that you are in a situation where you want help and need help, there is a national domestic violence line that you can call for help, and that number is 800-799-7233. Again, that's the National Domestic Violence Hotline. That's 800-799-7233. There is help out there if you or someone is in a situation where their safety may be at risk. Now, again, we're talking about so many things here that, quite honestly, in the African American communities, we don't talk a lot about our mental health issues, and we've talked a lot about stress, depression, substance abuse, compulsive behavior. We've talked about domestic violence, but somewhere in this conversation, we want to talk real quickly before we run out of time about the family dynamics, the children that are often a part of this, witness to this, sometimes used as tokens of war in some of these situations. Asha, if you can maybe talk to us a little bit about, how do we address these things with our children?
So I've found when I've seen families in outpatient clinic that I used to work in, that it's a secret, right? So you come from a family as a child where domestic violence is something that's covert, and as much as possible the children are informed some way to be the gatekeeper to that information, right? We don't want to tell what goes on in our house to strangers, and we especially don't want people who are in mental health or medical professions to know, because of the risk of child abuse and neglect and kids being removed from the home. However, the children, being those informed gatekeepers, tend to carry the burden of keeping that a secret and explaining this somehow to their internal psyche, that this is the way in which we as people and eventually as adults will behave in our relationships to one another. It informs children that words are not used to express emotions, but rather physical violence is the end all be all to solving solutions and to communicating with people that we love and care about. So when we talk about family dynamics, it's not unusual that you'll see an adult in a relationship, in a violent relationship, coming from a family system of violence and seeing their partner as a mirror image of someone, maybe their father or their mother, who was involved in a relationship of violence or was the aggressor in the violent relationship. It's very touchy when you do have families in treatment in terms of what is being shared and how you broach the issue, because of the risk of kids being removed from the home and families being outed and mothers still being at risk for so many safety issues regarding themselves and their children. But it's an issue that we do have to discuss, because children do not tend to be what people consider as resilient. They are people who learn to repress or suppress these feelings and then in turn sometimes act out on their peers in their social situations. So I think when we talk about children in this light and in terms of the family dynamics, it is encompassing of all the people involved from the father down to the child.
Mm-hmm.
So, Dr. Pickens, let me spin this a little bit. Asha talked about the children not being as resilient. What are some behaviors or things that I might see in the children that would alert me to something going on in their home? That there might be some family dynamic issues, and this and I'm seeing this kid maybe act out or behave in a certain way. Can you tell us what some of those things I might want to look out for?
Yeah, and I definitely a couple of things that you want to look out for. First of all, is if the kid is having a hard time separating from the parents. We see a lot of separation anxiety in when it's domestic violence or other situations where the child feels the parent will be hurt when they're not there, so they might not want to go to school for long periods of time. We also might see a child who seems to act very aggressively towards others, even though it might not be appropriate for the situation. And in fact, that's how kids show depression many times, is irritability, aggressive behavior. It might not be the same sad mood that we are accustomed to seeing in adults. Some other things, they might refuse to eat at times, just really behaviors that isolate them from people and almost force people to have to connect with them, even though they don't know that's what they are doing in some way. And so, I think that's something that's really important to keep in mind. And, I think Asha was right on target with talking about, the damage, the long-term damage that this can do to kids chronically. We know toxic stress, which is trauma over time, can impact the kid cognitively in terms of how they see the world, how they understand the world, and how they use how they look for threat in the world. And so they can really look for threat everywhere. At the same time, I have to say that kids, they have an ability to grow out of these difficult situations if they get the right kind of support, and they aren't damaged for life, and really have the potential, if they get the people around them who know how to help them build skills out of these situations, to really contribute a lot to themselves and to a lot of other people. And so I think we want to make sure that the resiliency can be hurt, but it's not damaged permanently.
And Dr. Wadley, you can, as we start to sum up this conversation, what is it that I can do to support families who are going through these type of issues, especially at this time of year? I mean, we talked about already having maybe stress or depression issues, but then you add into that, some of these maybe domestic violence issues or substance abuse or compulsive behaviors. And I know it's, I'm really concerned about the children, but how can I, as maybe an outsider, someone who's seeing this, how can I support someone else going through this? What can I do?
Yeah, I would say, just to kind of piggyback on what everyone was talking about, is making sure that your friends and family have access to resources. In the Black community, sometimes we struggle with, trying to manage who we are, but then manage our families. And sometimes we're a little bit too proud to seek support. There is the overarching notion that we all have to be strong, like you have to have the strong black man and you have to have the strong black woman. And sometimes those stereotypes or monikers, they keep us from seeking support and they keep us from talking about what's really going on with us. And as we mentioned before, that causes a lot of stress, and which may lead to moodiness or isolation or anxiety or even the possibility of suicidal ideation. But it's really important for, what I share with my clients is that they remember that they don't have to do anything alone, and if they are willing to reach out to get support from healthy friends, healthy family, and possibly a pastor or a practitioner or someone, they can help manage not only themselves but manage their position in society as well as with their families.
If I could just add one thing to that too, as practitioners, if we have conversations with our clients where we help them to understand the global sense of some of these emotions and dynamics that are going on at very specific times of the year, like the holidays, it helps them to not feel as if they're carrying all this baggage on their own. So when we as people of color in particular think that we're the only ones suffering at this time, it makes us feel more isolated from people around us. But we normalize that these are emotions and feelings that many people are going through, and that people have different ways of being able to show how they cope with it, then it helps people to feel like, okay, this is normal behavior. I'm not crazy. This is not the only feeling that is going on inside of me, but other people understand this as well, and it gives them a sense of feeling like they're with you and they understand and you understand where they're coming from.
Thank you so much for that, Asha. And actually, thank you to all of our experts. This has been a wonderful introductory conversation, because this is definitely a topic that we need to continue to have in our homes, in our schools, in our churches, and just everywhere that I can think about. And again, for those who maybe who've just tuned in, we were talking about stress, depression, domestic violence, a slew of things as it relates to mental health issues, especially in the African American communities. And I wanted to recall two important numbers that have been that we mentioned on the call earlier, in case you or someone you know can benefit from this. That is the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. That number is 1-800-273-TALK. Again, that's 800-273-TALK. And for those of you who may be experiencing domestic violence or know someone who may be in a situation and wants and needs help, that number is 1-800-799-7233. Again, that's 800-799-7233. But at this time, we're going to be bringing this discussion to a close. Again, want to thank blackdoctor.org, your daily medicine for life. They are an organization that is bringing these Google Chats, very important health information to you, bringing the experts, and I have to thank them. I want to encourage everyone to please go to Twitter, please go to Facebook and follow them at blackdoctor.org, and please also visit their YouTube, where this very discussion will be posted for future reference and to look at a later date. And again, thank you to all of our panelists. And what I'd like to do right now is give each of them a quick 30 seconds to give us a last takeaway, maybe a pearl of wisdom about today's discussion, and something that, let viewers know what it is they should take home. And also, please share your contact information should viewers want to reach out to you for more information. So, Asha, if we can go ahead and start with you.
I just like to say, let's continue to use empowering language for our clients and our loved ones so that they understand where the power lies, and that the power does begin in them, and that if they feel that they've lost it, they have a right to have their power back. They deserve it, and we have to let them know that it's okay to seek help. It doesn't make you less of a human being, less of a woman, or less of a man, but you are empowered to seek help, and you deserve to be healthy. If people want to follow my work, you can go on Twitter and follow me at Asha Tari, or Facebook at Asha Tari, and I'm also on LinkedIn under Asha Tari.
Thank you very much. Dr. Pickens.
Hope is moving closer to help, and it doesn't mean that you are immediately healed as soon as you try to reach out for help, or if you're the one helping someone, they'll be immediately healed. But if we're just moving closer in that direction, we are really moving closer to hope and a better situation. So I just want to encourage people not to give up when they first try to get help and it doesn't work out. Definitely push forward, and you'll find someone who can push you closer to that place of healing that you're looking for. If you want to follow me, you can find me on Twitter at Pickens Points, or you can visit my website at www.eyeopeningenterprises.com. It was great talking with you guys.
Thank you. And last but not least, Dr. Radley.
Yeah, I would just like to add that, during this holiday season, when you spend time with your friends and family, I would encourage you to talk about life, love, and happiness and whatever it is that's going on with you. But when you talk, be real with yourself, be real with the people around you, and be real with people who you know care about you as a person, care about you and your trajectory, and care about you and the lifestyle that you lead. For folks who want to get in touch with me via Twitter, it's PhDJamesW. You can see me at drjameswadley.com, and I am the editor-in-chief of the New Journal of Black Sexuality and Relationships, and I encourage you to go to www.thejbsr.com.
Thank you so much. And again, we want to thank blackdoctor.org for hosting these wonderful Google Chats. Tons of wonderful health information. Again, they are your daily medicine for life. Please go to Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram and follow blackdoctor.org. And again, this very Google Hangout will be on their YouTube station as well. So please, go back, revisit it, watch it, share it with others. Again, this is a conversation that needs to continue. And again, I'm Nurse Alice Benjamin. Very happy to be the moderator for today. I am also on social media. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Ask Nurse Alice. And so that concludes our conversation. And again, I want to thank everyone for their time, and the conversation will continue. Thank you, blackdoctor.org.
Thank you.